The last 2 years I've hardly moved out at all. I traveled a great deal before, but now I feel very much called to this, not silence and solitude, but to a life which is centered in the ashram. See, many people come all the time from so many parts, but more and more I feel the need to be centered and to find God in myself, in the ashram, in the people, to create a center where the people come, you see, to find God, really. And it's not easy in the West, and it's not easy in many parts of India today. People are being simply carried away by this wave of industrialization and so on. And people are looking for centers where they find God, find their inner self, find the deeper meaning of life. And that is where I see the ashram, really, a center where people discover themselves and discover God, really.
What did you find, and what do you still find most lovable about India?
When I came to India, I wrote to a friend and said, I want to find the other half of my soul. And I still feel that that was very significant, that in the West we've developed this rational aspect of religion. We have a fully developed theology, which is profoundly rational, very profound in its way, but also limited. And we've not fully discovered the other half of the soul, the intuitive power. And when I came to India, I was overwhelmed with this sense of the intuitive basis of life. I used to put it in terms of the unconscious, you see. In the West, we've developed the conscious, rational mind and developed with science and technology, and we've great achievement in its way. But in the East, they have lived out this other side of the mind, this intuitive, sympathetic, more poetic in some ways, but above all more contemplative, you see. And I never forget going to the Elephanta caves in Bombay, you know, seeing this wonderful figure of Shiva with his three faces, and the face in front of you is in profound contemplation. And I suddenly realized then how India had lived out this mystery of the indwelling God, you see. That was really opened my mind. And so it really was a kind of love affair, and I visited many Hindu temples and discovered the whole Indian world, which is very strange, of course, at first to many people, and still is to some extent. And still, it gradually enters into your unconscious, you see. It's the invasion of the unconscious. Your conscious mind begins to discover these depths beyond conscious reasoning, at the intuitive depth, right down to the basic physical reality. You discover your physical being, and then in the Hindu tradition, you have the chakras, you see, these centers of energy, and there's a physical base, which you find yourself one with the earth, with matter, with life, you see, the whole background of your life. And then you have the, what's called a Swadhisthana, the vital energy, you see, and you live out your vital energy in you and in the plant world, the living world around you. Then your emotional energy, where you relate to all human emotional experience. Then through the imaginative and the rational, finally to the spiritual. So it's an unfolding of the whole human personality, but going right back to your roots in matter, in life, you see. And that's where I feel, you see, this holistic vision is beginning to emerge. We've got the conscious mind, which is really only a segment of reality, and we begin to relate it to the unconscious in all its levels, right to the base, physical base, and then see how the human being grows from that base and gradually develops to the highest spiritual experience, you see, from your base right up to the highest level. And that, to me, is India's understanding of life.
Could you tell us something about how your own monastic journey brought you into contact with the thought and the spirituality of India?
Yes, you see, I read the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada of the Buddha, and the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu when I was in the 20s, you know. That was my first sort of discovery of the East. and also contemporary with my discovery of Christianity at a deeper level. And so that sort of stream entered into my life. And when I became a monk at Prinnage Abbey, this side rather went into the background, and I focused all the time on the Christian experience of God and the Fathers and Middle Ages and so on. And then in about 1940, I met a very remarkable woman, Toni Sussman. She was a German who studied, she was one of Jung's first disciples, and studied yoga in Berlin. And she and her husband, who was a Jew, came to London in the 1940s, in the 1930s, when Hitler was in power, and they started a meditation center, really, in London. And that was my first introduction, really, to Eastern meditation and really Eastern spirituality as a whole. And from that point, I began to discover the East, the whole idea of yoga, Vedanta, and in the 40s, until finally, in 55, I was invited by an Indian Benedictine monk, Father Alapat, to come with him to India to start an ashram in India. And so we came out in 1955. We started a small community near Bangalore, but it didn't last very long. And then I joined Father Francis Mayur, Cistercian monk, and we began together this ashram, Kurushimala Ashram in Kerala. And there we took the Oriental, the Syrian rite, and tried to live our Christian life according to the Syrian rite in the tradition of India, wearing the kavi, sitting on the floor, adopting Indian customs generally. So that was a new stage, and for about 10 years I was at Kurushimala in Kerala.
Om Ishaya Jyotisham Jyotishe Namaha.
Om Ishaya Namaha.
Om Ishaya Kanya Sudaya Namaha.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice of our hands for the praise and glory of His name, for all good and good of His church. And then in 1968, I was invited here to Shantivanam when Father le Saux, one of the two founders of this ashram, left here to settle in the Himalayas. And when he left, I came with two monks of Kurushimala, and we began to live here. And it was very primitive when we first came. There were palmara trees, that's a type of palm, not coconut trees. Eventually we cut down the palmaras and planted coconuts. And these palmara trees were really in a kind of wilderness. There were thorns and things everywhere, and just little tracks through the ashram. It was very primitive, almost a desert, you know. It was very wonderful in its way. And Father Monchanin and Father le Saux were these two French fathers who were the real pioneers, and they really opened the way to an Indian Christian ashram. You see, they adopted the customs of a Hindu ashram, wearing the kavi, sitting on the floor, eating with the hands, all these simple customs traditional in India. And then they tried to live out their Christian life in the context of Hindu culture, you see. Of course, at that time, before the Vatican Council, they had the Latin liturgy and rather limited horizon. But after the Vatican Council, we broke through beyond that, and we've been able now, of course, to adapt our Christian life to the whole Indian culture, we call it, which means, of course, the Hindu culture to a large extent, because Hinduism is the basic culture of India. And so in these last 20 years, we've been able gradually to develop an Indian liturgy. And we have our prayer now with Sanskrit chanting, reading different scriptures, psalms and Bible reading, and then bhajan singing, as it's called, these pop devotional songs in which everybody joins, and then this custom of arati, waving lights before the Blessed Sacrament. So we've really developed an Indian liturgy in that way. And then our next challenge was in Indian theology. And there I was influenced very much by our Father Johannes. He was a Belgian Jesuit who, with a companion, Father Dandois, started a magazine called The Light of the East in Calcutta in the 1920s. And he was a great Sanskrit scholar and really a master of the Sanskrit tradition. And he wrote several long series of articles to Christ through the Vedanta. And that was the sort of opening for my mind. And he tried to show how we could develop a Christian theology based not on Plato and Aristotle or St. Thomas Aquinas, but on the Vedanta. And he studied the different systems of Vedanta to try to show how they could be the means for developing an authentic Indian theology. And his work was a pioneer work, and it's taken a long time, but today in India, theologians are all thinking along those lines. We're trying really to develop an Indian Christian theology. It takes time. We're still very much in the Western mold, but the breakthrough is taking place and certainly will continue. And then the third aspect, which to me perhaps is the most important, is to develop an Indian Christian spirituality. You see, there we try to adopt yoga primarily. You see, yoga is a whole way of life, and it's based on the body, the hatha yoga, the development of the physical aspect of it, and the pranayama, the control of the breathing. But it leads on to the Raja Yoga, the control of the mind, how to control the mind and allow the spirit to enter in and transform the person. So body and soul are transformed by the indwelling spirit. And that is where the Indian and the Christian meet. You see, we're discovering how we can go beyond the body and the mind and open ourselves to the indwelling spirit. And then we encounter the Hindu experience of God from the time of the Upanishads, where they really went beyond the created world to the uncreated, and we meet what one of our founders, Father le Saux, called the Hindu-Christian meeting point in the cave of the heart. And that is, to me, the real meeting between the Church and the India, and that's really what we're trying to explore today.
In regard to the development of an Indian Christian theology, do you find that people today are resistant to that in some quarters?
It's taken me a long time, you know, really, to adapt to it and to realize its significance. But it's been a fairly continuous growth. I must say, from the moment I arrived in India, in Bombay in 1955, I fell in love with India and the whole culture, you know, so that it's grown continuously from that. But I think for many people it is a very considerable problem. You see, in the West, people have been brought up to think of Christianity as the one true religion and really to reject paganism and idolatry and superstition, you see, is branded for Hinduism. And for many it's a real problem, and some simply reject it. I mean, people will say yoga is of the devil. And all this Vedantic philosophy, it's pantheism or monism, they give the different names to it. And so it's a very considerable challenge, and many find it extremely difficult to accept. But a growing majority, among more serious thinkers, are realizing its real significance and are beginning to discover how, as I say, we could evolve a Christian Vedanta, you see, and a Christian spirituality introducing the basic understandings of the Hindu, and of course then also we extend to the Buddhist, you see, because Buddhism has its own unique contribution to make. So we begin to see today the complementarity of religions, you see, that so far we've rarely put Christianity alone and either rejected the others or seen them merely as preparations. But today the movement is much more for this complementarity. The one divine truth, mystery of God, is manifesting itself in these different cultural forms. And we have to see Christianity in the context of Hinduism in its various forms, of Buddhism, also of Islam. So today I think it's this encounter of religions which is really one of the main factors in our life today, how we relate ourselves to each of these profound traditions of the experience of God. Yes, I feel the challenge to the Church today really comes from this encounter with the East, you see. The Church has grown up in the West and developed its whole doctrine and way of life, and only today really are we encountering the religions of the East and the culture of the East. And it really is a new era in which we enter, where the Christian people and the Christian understanding of life opens itself and relates itself to the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Taoist, the whole Oriental vision of life. And this is really a new age, a new phase in our history. And we're trying now to see how we understand Christianity and the whole Christian message in the context of India, of the East as a whole. And that is really our challenge today.
Do you think that any particular religion of the East is important more than others for that encounter?
Well, we think primarily of Hinduism and Buddhism, you see. Buddhism with all its developments in the Hinayana, the Mahayana and Tibet, you see. And then Hinduism with its great variety, you know. You see, Hinduism is a vast religion, really, with many aspects, and many people would see Jainism and the Sikhism and different forms of Hinduism as manifestations of this one Oriental religion, really, you see.
Do you think the contemplative awakening that's happening in the Western Church is affected by the meeting with the East?
Yes, I do very much. I think we have our own mystical tradition in the West, and it's had a great history, but it's been obscured to some extent, particularly in recent times. And to me, it's the encounter with the experience of God in the East, which is really the great movement today. We discover how the Eastern world has experienced God. The Hindu, the Buddhist, the various forms of Hinduism, Buddhism, they have a unique experience of God, and we have to relate their experience with our experience. And this is a very profound meeting and an opening and a sharing, and we're still really on the way to discovering its full significance. It's only gradually dawning on us, I think.
Do you think that the contemplative renewal that's taking place in the Western Church is helped forward by the encounter with the East?
Yes, I think we have to open ourselves to our Western tradition, first of all, of course, to the Christian East, which is profoundly important, and the fathers, Greek fathers, and then to the whole medieval tradition, where particularly I would place Meister Eckhart, you know. I think he's very great significance. Today we're rediscovering Eckhart, and there you have a profound link with the East. Eckhart sort of carried the Christian tradition to almost its limit in that particular way. And now I think we begin to see how this whole Christian tradition, Oriental and Occidental, coming to a head, perhaps in Eckhart and also Ruysbroek, you know, the Rhineland tradition, how that begins to open up now to the Hindu and the Buddhist tradition. And these two experiences of God are really beginning to open to one another, and we're beginning to discover that dimension.
What would you say are the most encouraging and hopeful signs for the renewal of the Church in the West today?
Yes. Well, I suppose I do think more of this encounter with the East. You see, I think there is a very important development of Christianity, and we are discovering various aspects of the Christian tradition, but I still feel that it's only when our Western tradition discovers the East and begins to see Christianity in the context of the East and really begins to explore the riches of the East, that we're going to have a fully developed Christianity. You see, we're still reaching out, and as we open ourselves, I feel there should be a flowering of Christianity in the light of the East, and the East in the light of Christianity, you see. I think it's going to be a real meeting and a sharing and a discovery on both parts, really.
And you see meditation as a common
yes.
bond between the two?
Very much, yeah. I feel meditation is just the point where we meet, you see. And remembering, of course, that meditation has a different meaning in the West and the East. In the West, we normally think of meditation as an exercise in discursive prayer, the Ignatian exercise, a classical example. But we have our more interior tradition. But in the East, what we call meditation is what the East calls, put it the other way around. What we call contemplation in the West is what they call meditation in the East. It's passing beyond discursive prayer, entering into the inner silence, to the inner depth. And that is where the meeting is taking place. We are opening our contemplative tradition right through from St. Gregory of Nyssa, Dionysius, the medieval traditions of John of the Cross, opening that to the Hindu and the Buddhist experience of God.
Would you have thought 10, 20 or 30 years ago that as many people as are now meditating in the West would be doing so today?
No, I think it's a new phenomenon, you know. It's very remarkable. And I suppose looking back, I don't think I knew of anything quite like that, you know. You see, we had our types of meditation, and of course in the monastic tradition we had our Lectio Divina, who meditated the scriptures, and it could lead to a deep contemplative experience. But I don't think we normally went beyond into this inner silence. The cloud of unknowing, you know, and other writings of that kind were taking us beyond. It was a movement, but I think it's only in the last 20 or 30 years that we've really opened ourselves to the full contemplative tradition and discovered that we are opening ourselves to the East. You see, the two of them have begun to meet.
You've spoken and written about John Main as a significant teacher of the Church today and as a guide for the spiritual search for modern people.
Yes, that to me is really very significant. I always go back to the fact that before he became a monk, he went to the East and he discovered meditation in the East, you see, with this Swami Satyananda, I think it was, in Malaya. And he opened himself to this traditional Eastern form of meditation with the mantra. It was discovery for him. Then he went back, and we're told the Benedictines told him to give all that up. This was all Western, this was Oriental, and pagan and you must not meditate like that. And then he discovered the mantra in Kashan and the cloud of unknowing in the Western tradition, and then linked up there by the Christian tradition of the mantra and contemplation with the Eastern tradition of the mantra. So to me that really was a breakthrough, and it's opened up the Western world in a new way.
What do you find particularly exciting about his theology, in particular his Christology?
It's really, you know, his extraordinary insight into ultimate reality, you see. It's that he got beyond discursive thought and all types of that kind of meditation, and took people and takes people really into this inner experience, which he puts it, I think, so marvelously really, the experience of Christ, the consciousness of Christ. We enter into the consciousness of Jesus, and Jesus' experience of God, of the Father, and in the Spirit we ourselves participate in the consciousness of Christ and discover the inner mystery in the heart. And to me, he really has opened that dimension of contemplation to people today as a whole.
Over the years, you formed an Indian monastic community here.
Yes, it's taken time, but two brothers from Kerala joined us in 1971. We started in 68, so one or two people came, and then in 71 these two brothers came, and they are still really the source of the community. And after that, others came. Slowly, over 20 years, it's grown to a community of about 10 people now, and all Indian, apart from myself, and all of them discovering how to live their Christian life in the full context of Indian culture. See, that's really what we're doing.
In the ashram here, there are many Western visitors. Do you think that the influence of the ashram is equally divided between the West and the East?
I think it is. It's been very interesting. We get a great many visitors from the West, especially at certain times in the year. But at other times, we have a great many Indian Christians especially coming, and they are discovering the Indian tradition in their lives. They were very westernized, but now more and more the younger ones, sisters and brothers and priests, discover their Indian inheritance and are beginning to relate it to their Christian life. And so I find that very important. Sometimes of the year it's almost entirely Indians are here. Other times it's almost entirely Western. It varies. But it's important, I think, that the two go together there, you see, and the Indian is discovering his Indian tradition, and Westerners are coming and discovering that dimension in their lives, you see, too.
What have been the greatest difficulties, challenges that you've faced in the last 20 years or so?
Well, there has been opposition, you know. I don't think it's very considerable, but there's been a natural Christian reaction. You see, Christians were brought up to think all Hinduism is evil and must be rejected, and only Christianity is true, and only the Western Christianity, which they know. So there's been a group of people who, Christian for the faith sort of thing, who are militantly opposed to all this Indianization. But that movement has died down very much, and the bishops as a whole and the priests, they've come round now to realizing that Indianization is part of the meaning of our Christian life in India. So I don't consider it very important, but it has upset quite a number of people, there's no doubt. They weren't ready for this change. But there's a national center in Bangalore, organized by a very wonderful person, Father Amala Bhavadas, and for 15 years he's been indoctrinating the Indian church in this Indian way of life, of liturgy, of prayer, meditation, and that has spread all over India really now.
And what are your hopes for the ashram in the years to come?
Well, I think it is a matter of slow growth, really, you know. It really does take time, and still today, not many Indian Christians or Indian Catholics are ready for this kind of monastic experience, you know. You see, the other religious orders, particularly the Jesuits, but the Franciscans, Dominicans, Redemptorists, so many others, have all come with the active ministry. And the church in India has been organized by them and is really geared to action. And today, particularly, the sense of the option for the poor, the concern for the suffering people of India, that has taken possession very rightly of the church. And they're all really concerned how to bring people, the poor and the suffering in India, into a better way of life. But we all feel very strongly, and many of their leaders too, that we have to discover the other dimension. It's no good simply going out to the poor and trying to find Christ there. You can up to a point, but unless you're discovering Christ within, you're never going to have a really profound effect on people's lives. So today we're trying to see how this concern for the poor and social justice can be brought into the inner life of prayer, and we can discover Christ within. And then when Christ is fully realized within, then you discover him outside in people, in all their problems and their sufferings. So I think that is where we are today, this meeting between contemplation and action, if you like to call it, and that is spreading through the church, really.
Do you think that you have become an Indian by adoption?
I think so, really, you know, yes. It's been an extraordinary experience. You see, it's taken 33 years now, and it's grown continuously from year to year. And today I'm more Indian than I'm Western, I think. But I think also, you know, I've really begun to discover the common oneness between the East and the West. You see, when you really enter the mystical tradition of the West, if Gregory of Nyssa is still to me a great shining light, you know, and Dionysius the Areopagite, and then through the medieval mystics, Eckhart and Roosevelt, and then St. Teresa, St. John of the Cross, this is the whole mystical world, you see, and then you relate that to the world of the Indian mysticism, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhakti tradition, this tradition of devotional love, pouring out their love to God, these beautiful hymns and songs. So it's an encounter there, you see, where you discover this other world of devotion and of love and of wisdom, of jnana, you see. There is this wisdom which is an experience of God. So I feel really it's coming together in my life and in the lives of many, many people all over the world. We're ceasing to be merely Western or merely Eastern. We're discovering the human inheritance, you see. We're discovering what it is to be totally human and totally open to the divine.